Today we will turn once again to the labor market and the issue of unemployment. We talked about the labor market in two previous chapters. One, chapter 18, that talked about the value of marginal product of workers, and we talked about how equilibrium wages in the labor market are derived. And in another chapter on monopolistic competition, we discussed labor market as an example of a market where the product between different providers is differentiated. And we said that in the labor market, individual workers are providers of a little bit different products. In this chapter, we will study unemployment and the labor market from a little bit more macroeconomic perspective, and we will introduce some terminology that macroeconomists use when they discuss labor issues. Let's go over some of this terminology. So first of all, when we think of unemployment, we should distinguish unemployment that always exists in the economy, so-called natural rate of unemployment, and we say that there are three sources of natural rate of unemployment in the economy. And then the second portion of unemployment is the cyclical, which depends on the current conditions in the overall economy, whether there is growth or recession in the economy. Let's go over these individual components of overall unemployment. So frictional unemployment comes from search for jobs among workers. It takes time for workers to find an optimal employment, and it takes time for companies to find ideal workers for their jobs. Workers and employers take weeks or months to get matched, and because of this time delay between when openings become available or when workers become available and when employment is secured, there is some temporary unemployment. Structural unemployment is unemployment due to cultural or legal reasons. For some systematic reason in the economy, we can have unemployment even in the long run. For example, the government might set minimum wages, and we already know from the microeconomic part of the course that with price caps or with price floors, the economy may not be in the equilibrium. Impossibility to adjust wages downward. We will say in the next few chapters on the financial market that sometimes it is easier to adjust prices upward in the economy than downward. So if the current economic conditions call for lower wages than the wages currently present, the economy might find it difficult to adjust. And for some time, until the economic conditions correct themselves, we could have unemployment. Uncertainty about market conditions. If companies or workers are scared about future conditions in the economy, they might not be willing to switch jobs, or companies might not be willing to hire workers even if there's a current need for more workers. So temporarily, companies might, if there is uncertainty in the economy, both companies and workers might behave more cautiously than they would if the uncertainty wasn't present. Union power or monopsony power. We will say a little bit about the issue of market power, and we will say that it doesn't matter if market power exists on the supply side or on the demand side of the market, we could have unemployment because of that. Technological change in the industry, because the industries and products made in the economy change over time, the skills that workers in the economy have might not be as useful in different time periods. And it may take time for workers to upskill themselves, or for companies to figure out what skills they need from their workers. And as the technology continuously improves, there might be constantly some amount of unemployment because of that. Seasonal unemployment is the simple kind of unemployment between, an example is agricultural sector, where there is great demand for workers during the time of harvest and small demand for workers in other times of the year. So because of this seasonal mismatch between how many workers are available and how many workers are needed, there is month-to-month fluctuation in unemployment rate. Cyclical unemployment is the one that depends on year-to-year fluctuations in the economy, and we would expect this unemployment to exist in the short run, but we would say that in the long run, the conditions in the economy should correct themselves, and the economy should get to the natural rate of unemployment. So to summarize, in any particular short-run situation, we could see all of these four types of unemployment, or some of these unemployment rates could be zero. We could, during a particularly busy season, there could be zero seasonal unemployment or zero cyclical unemployment. In the long run, we would only expect these three types of unemployment, but no cyclical unemployment. By definition, we will discuss that more in chapter 33. In the long run, when all of the long run is defined by the condition that all resources in the economy are used efficiently, and there is no cyclical unemployment. And we should think that in terms of the pattern over time, frictional unemployment might be slowly developing, either slowly decreasing, maybe sometimes increasing over time. Structural unemployment just depends on how the cultural and legal conditions in the economy change. If the government introduces a new law, structural unemployment could jump up or could jump down. And seasonal unemployment and cyclical unemployment are expected to fluctuate over time. A little side note on frictional unemployment. Overall, we would expect frictional unemployment to fall over time, because it is generally easier and easier for companies and workers to get matched with each other. The government becomes smarter at matching workers with companies. The technology, such as the internet, exists where workers and companies can find each other. It didn't used to be that way. On the other hand, because of upskilling, companies might find it harder over time to find the correct workers for the very technologically intensive jobs. So it is unclear whether frictional unemployment strictly decreases or could even increase over time. Just to illustrate, natural rate of unemployment is fairly stable over time. It could slightly increase or decrease, and overall unemployment, which includes both the natural rate and cyclical, can fluctuate a great deal. So this figure shows us how important the cyclical component of unemployment is. How do we calculate the unemployment rate? Well, the government, so in the US, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in Korea it is the Bank of Korea, collects information about people's employment status. It groups, these agencies group people as non-adult population, and among adult population, people who are employed, people who are unemployed, and people who are not in the labor force. And how does the government distinguish these kinds of people? Well, in the US, everybody who is 16 years of age and older is officially an adult, and among these workers, among these people, if the person has spent any time in the previous week working for pay, he is considered to be employed this week. A person is unemployed if the person wasn't working for pay in the previous week, but he is on a temporary layoff, looking for a job, or waiting for the start of a new job. People who don't fit any of these categories, such as students, people who are occupied at home, retirees, are considered to be not in the labor force. In Korea, the one difference is that Bank of Korea considers everybody who is 15 years and older to be an adult. So that we might see some differences in statistics between Korea and the US because of these different definitions. And to get to what we're interested in, the unemployment rate, we simply look at the overall size of the labor force. And let's remember that labor force is the number employed plus number unemployed. And we divide number unemployed by the sum of employed and unemployed workers. Labor force participation rate is just the ratio of the entire labor force to the entire adult population in a country. And generally we multiply these ratios by 100, so we would talk about let's say 5% unemployment rate, 10% unemployment rate, and so on. Maybe 50 or 60% labor force participation rate. Now, just like with the definitions that we had for aggregate output or for the amount of saving in the economy or for inflation, there are some problems with these definitions. For at least two reasons, the unemployment rate may not represent very well the ease of workers to find occupation. One problem is that of discouraged workers. If people are looking for a job for several time periods and they're not successful, they might completely give up on their search and leave a labor force. So even though these people are not included in the unemployed group anymore, we should still think that they represent a problem. These people are not happy with the labor market. They would want to work, but they simply gave up because they didn't see the likelihood of getting a job very high. On the other hand, people who are outside of the labor force might want to pretend to be looking for work to collect unemployment benefits that the government offers them. So because of this point, unemployment rate, the officially reported unemployment rate could be lower than the effective uneasiness of finding jobs in the economy. But because of this factor, it could be the other way. The reported number could actually overstate how difficult it is for people to find jobs. So overall, we should view the officially reported unemployment rate carefully. It may not represent exactly what we want it to. Let's talk about two kinds of unemployment in more detail now. Let's talk about frictional unemployment on this slide, and then let's turn to structural unemployment, talk about a couple of sources of structural unemployment, and talk about a little bit more conceptual material. So frictional unemployment, we said, comes from difficulty, or from the time it takes for workers and companies to get matched with each other correctly. Now, the government recognizes this problem and tries to make it easier on companies and workers to find each other. Government usually sets up employment agencies that help in this process, that make it faster for workers and companies to find each other. I also said that in the economy, the level of technology used continuously improves or changes, and as a result, the skills that workers have today may not be the correct set of skills tomorrow. Government recognizes it and sometimes sets up public training programs so that workers who cannot find job currently because of their outdated skills will be able to upskill and find a new job. Unemployment insurance is a government program that tries to help currently unemployed workers to stay employable. One problem with unemployment is that if workers lose their job, they have no means to keep themselves healthy, to keep their strengths and skills up to date, and we should think that the longer a person is unemployed, maybe the more difficult it is for that person to find a job. Also, when people are unemployed, they're desperate to find a new job, and they are desperate to get the first job offered to them rather than find the correct job well matched to them. So by offering unemployment insurance to them, the government makes it easier for people to stay unemployed and get matched to the correct kind of job. Now, you may remember from early in the semester, we discussed this program from the equity and efficiency point of view, and we said that there are also some problems with this program. The problem is that because of unemployment insurance, workers may not have the correct incentives to try to keep their job. They may not try hard enough to find a job because they are getting effectively they're getting a salary from the government for being unemployed. So as a result of unemployment insurance, maybe workers can get fired faster because if they have a job, they don't have a very high incentive to keep that job. If people are unemployed, they will not try as hard to find a new job. So we would expect that because of this program, the unemployment spells will be longer in the economy. Okay, let's turn to structural unemployment a little bit. I said that structural unemployment exists because of some systemic reasons, some cultural, legal reasons. The government might set minimum wages. There could be market power on the supply side or on the demand side. We will also discuss the model of efficiency wages, and we will compare it to the monopolistically competitive market structure that we studied before. And I said that because of technological progress and there is a continuous need for upskilling of workers in the economy, and that results in unemployment. So this is a graph that we studied in the beginning of the semester that showed us that because of a price floor, the market cannot achieve the equilibrium level of the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price or wage. And so in this solution, without any black market, we would have excess supply of labor, and that's exactly the unemployment, the number of unemployed workers that we would see in the economy. If there is market power on the supply side, we can discuss the situation just as we discussed monopoly in a previous chapter. Basically, labor union, when labor union is considering getting another worker hired, it realizes that in order for one more worker to get hired, this additional worker will receive a salary, but all of the existing workers who are already employed, their wage rate will have to fall a little bit. There's both a price effect and a quantity effect to the increase in employment for the union. And effectively, the union doesn't care only about the labor demand curve, but it cares about the marginal earnings curve. And this marginal earnings curve represents this trade-off between output effect and price effect of the union. So when another worker gets hired, the union recognizes that this worker will earn some wages, but all the existing workers will earn lower wages than before. And for the union to want to hire another worker, these marginal earnings should be greater than the marginal disutility of work represented by this labor supply curve. So effectively, labor unions will want to stop the hiring process at this number of workers rather than at the efficient number of workers, which would be here. So surprisingly or paradoxically, even from the workers' point of view, since the union represents workers, we would get that workers don't want too many other workers to get hired. Labor union cares about the existing workers, not only about the new workers being hired, and that's why the union wants to stop the hiring process at a smaller level of employment rather than the efficient level of employment. Okay, so this is the discussion of market power on the supply side. Now we can bring the discussion of market power on the demand side as well. So on the demand side, we've talked about the case of monopsony before. We said that monopsony is a single consumer of labor in the marketplace. Imagine a small town where there is only one factory, one employer hiring workers, and there are many small workers. This factory will have a monopsony power. The factory recognizes that if it hires an additional worker, First of all, comparing 2 points on the labor supply curve, first of all, the company has to offer a little bit higher wage to the marginal worker who is being hired. Second of all, if we are offering a little bit higher wage to this marginal worker, we also have to offer higher wages to all of the existing workers. So in the case of monopsony, we still have the output effect and the price effect of hiring an extra worker. But here, the two effects work in the same direction. Because of the output effect, the factory has to pay out greater wages, and also it has to pay higher wages to all of the existing workers. So because of that, the monopsonist faces a marginal expenditures curve, which is steeper than the labor supply curve. And the monopsonist would want to stop hiring workers where marginal expenditures on labor are equal to the value of the marginal product of the marginal worker. So if we only had market power on the demand side, we would conclude that the monopsonist will want to hire this many workers and pay this wage rate. Now, if we have both market power on the supply side and market power on the demand side, we could have this situation illustrated in this figure, where the monopolist, the monopsonist employer faces a marginal expenditures curve. The union, who is the monopolistic worker, faces this marginal earnings curve. And generally, it is unclear which wage rate and which level of employment these two monopolies will agree on. We should think that in this situation, there will have to be bargaining between the monopsonist and the union, and maybe, depending on the ability to bargain, any of these wages is possible. And when a particular wage rate is determined, that will determine the number of workers hired by the company. So we don't have a good prediction in this case of what would happen. We only know that the equilibrium wage in this situation would be somewhere between the union wage and the monopsony wage, and the equilibrium level of employment would be somewhere between these limited quantities and the efficient quantity. Finally, another model of unemployment is that of the efficiency wages. We can imagine that the labor market works as monopolistic competition, where the product produced by individual workers, their labor, is slightly differentiated. So workers have different health, different likelihood of turnover, different quality. Different workers exert different amount of effort. And it makes sense for companies to look around first before hiring a particular worker. And it makes sense for companies to offer slightly higher wages to encourage and to find time to find workers with the best health, best turnover, or lowest turnover rate, highest quality, and highest effort. This figure comes exactly from the chapter on monopolistic competition, and it summarizes that if workers are slightly differentiated, they have a little bit of market power in negotiating their wages. The equilibrium wages in this industry could be above wages that would result in perfect competition. The equilibrium amount of labor would be smaller than the efficient or perfectly competitive amount of labor. And the same predictions that we made about monopolistic competition, we can make here. That with this market structure, efficiency wages will be higher than the efficient wages. There will be some excess capacity among the workers, so there will be some amount of unemployment, and perhaps the level of costs that workers face will be higher than if the industry was perfectly competitive. If we think that workers have to pay some costs to be good workers, if people have to create very nice resumes, if they have to dress up to go to job, if some workers undergo plastic surgery, that raises the costs to workers in the industry, and we might see we might think that the costs in the industry are inflated compared to the levels in perfectly competitive markets. So the same predictions that we would make about monopolistically competitive markets, we can make here about the labor market with differentiated workers. So we've looked at different sources of unemployment in the economy and different models of why unemployment might be a continuous problem in the economy. Now, I want you to look at the economic conditions in the economy today and think about which of these factors are more important than others, and which of these models that we've covered is maybe more relevant or more correct in explaining the level of unemployment today.